because of the damage to the system, investors were afraid that we would fall into a slump. That's why I think buyers are being careful. But my friend Tom DeMar likes to talk about something he calls washed out markets. I think some things were really washed out, and we'll keep an eye on that. To be honest, I think this will go on for a while longer. I think the markets have to rely on a White House policy path that they can't always count on. There will be more risk in the markets, so they can't be sure that they can count on it. I still see this cap, even when I look at these new tariff rates. Do I think it'll be easy to get to stocks now? Yes, I think a lot of things were wiped out, but I'm not sure how close we are to a recession. You could say that the Federal Reserve doesn't have a handle on the response function. That's right, it's a blunt tool that hits somewhere we don't know about. Tom Lee says a big event is about to happen in the market, especially for cryptocurrencies. The XRP solid with Bitcoin today in the video. He'll talk about Trump's policies, what he thinks will happen soon, and a lot of other really interesting things he hasn't talked about in a while. Please click the like button so that everyone in the crypto space can see the movie. First, let's make it clear that the Fed's plan isn't really in effect until they think the markets will take on more risk, because they have to rely on fundamentals and White House policy that they can't always count on. Can they count on it? The White House said they would be open to changing things if things got really bad, but I don't think companies will be hit as hard as we first thought. For example, even though these tariff rates have been changed, I still see the cap. I think things could still get better after 90 days. Even if things stay the same, it might also be better for U.S. businesses. There might also be deals made for U.S. businesses. Do I think stocks are an easy way to get where I want to go? No. I think it's going to be really hard. The markets were expecting something simple but not harsh, but what happened was much worse. The rates in trade were much higher than most people thought they would be, which is why I think today is the day the market is finally getting used to the shock. Prices opened 3% to 12% lower than where they ended. And while they're still a little lower, they've been flat for the most part. Okay, I'm not sure if this is the right way to say it, but it was kind of a planned sell-off, even though it was big afterwards. I think buyers need to think about a few things for the next 2 days. I see this as a clear sign from the White House that they want once all of these things happen, the White House says, okay, let's make a deal. This is just my guess. The stock market will have to think about this for the next week or so. I'm from Goldman Sachs, and all 25 countries and $3.2 trillion worth of goods are subject to tariffs that raise prices by 12.6%. That number seems very high, but it's actually about 15%, which is what most people thought would happen in the worst case. Second, I think people should remember that only 6 or 7 countries are really important. There were about 100 countries named. And I know that people are angry that all of a sudden, all of these strange countries seem to charge high prices for their goods, but the U.S. gets more than 70% of its goods from just 6 places: Korea, China, Japan, South Korea, and Vietnam, the EU and Mexico. And there's a group of countries made up of Japan, the EU, and China. That might be the best way to understand it. When I look at South Korea and Vietnam, I think the U.S. will do something with Mexico and Canada. They won't have to pay these penalty taxes anyway, so it doesn't matter what happens with the USMCA. South Korea, Vietnam, and Japan are pretty much U.S. friends. I don't think they want to start a new trade war, but Japan, China, and Korea are part of, we know that Tom Lee is very optimistic about the future of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, XRP, and many more. He also doesn't think about taxes too much when he makes decisions, and he's been right so far. But one thing he hasn't talked about much lately is the Fed rate cuts and how they will affect what he thinks will happen in 2025. This is important because we thought the Fed would lower rates 5 times, but now we know they will only do it twice. Why does this happen? Well, since Trump started putting tariffs in place, their message has changed a lot. So Tom Lee does say what he thinks about this. I'm going to play this clip that I think shows what he says. It helps you learn more about the background. What's that back there? It's the bond market. Can you count on it? It does come in different forms though, because it's based on gut feelings. There isn't a number that will make a difference or a way to know how close we are to a recession. We don't have a handle on the Fed's reaction function, as you say. That does sound like a blunt tool that we don't know how to use, but I'm sure that US companies will come up with new ideas in the end. For example, if they have to pay more to buy goods, they won't just buy more imported goods, they'll also find creative ways to save money, which means they should spend a lot more on AI and robotics over the next 12 months. It's possible that these policies will be good for Main Street if jobs are lost, but I don't think it will be hard to reach a deal there. Those countries can either talk things out, fight back, or do nothing. I expect them to either talk things out or do nothing, and I'm sure they'll figure something out. The EU and China are the only two places that will really matter in this, and I think that's what people should be paying attention to. The EU is beating its chest right now and saying that they will do something bad if the US doesn't. Talking will be the main topic of the news, and China will try to do the same thing. But both China and the US need to talk about other things as well. China doesn't have a weak hand because it sells a lot of goods to the US. China has a few pretty big deals going on right now, like TikTok and the Panama Canal. Third, the US will need a lot of robots to try to do any onshoring. China makes all the dolls, so I think the US and China will work together. China will not do nothing while living with a 70% tax rate. In other words, I think the math works out with a few exceptions, like 47% for China and $600 0 cents for the EU. It doesn't make sense to spend $120 billion, 0 cents on taxes, as you may know. No, I don't think Japan, South Korea, or Vietnam will start a trade war with us. We think Canada and Mexico can work it out. What will happen if Europe or the EU buys $600 billion, 0 cents worth of goods? That's where the stakes are really high, and the tariffs are either 10% or 20%, which comes to 60 billion, 0 cents. That's the first reason I think the US will be okay, even though it looks like bad news is on the way. To be honest, I think Tom Lee will be right more and more as time goes on and more talks happen. Not only has there not been much inflation in the last 4 months while these tariffs have been in place, or have been put on hold while talks are going on, but the markets have also had a great rally since February when they crashed pretty badly. So it's great to see this.